John Charles Hagee has spent more than 6 decades in the pulpit, building one of the largest evangelical congregations in the United States and becoming one of the most recognized and most contested voices in American Christianity. To understand him is to understand a story with 3 overlapping threads: a family legacy of ministry stretching back generations, a media empire that carried his voice into millions of homes, and a series of public controversies that repeatedly put him at the center of national debate. This is his story as it actually happened. John Hagee was born on April 12, 1940. Sources differ slightly on the exact town, with some placing his birth in Baytown, Texas, and the Christians United for Israel biography and other outlets identifying it as Goose Creek, Texas, 2 communities that sit close together in the Houston area. What all accounts agree on is the family he was born into. Site index equals 3-1. Hagee is a 5th-generation pastor, the 47th descendant of his family to serve in ministry since they immigrated to America in the mid-1700s. Site that lineage traces back specifically to Anabaptist Mennonite roots, a heritage that shaped his theology and his sense of calling from an early age. Hagee's path might have looked very different. As a teenager, he was, by several accounts, a National Honor Society member and a four-sport athlete who had earned a commission to West Point and once aspired to a military career. That changed at 17, when he made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He committed himself to Christian ministry instead. Hagee's academic record reflects a young man who took both his intellect and his calling seriously. He earned a Bachelor of Science degree from what is now known as Southwestern Assemblies of God University in Waxahachie, Texas, at the time called Nelson University, and a second Bachelor of Science degree from Trinity University in San Antonio. He went on to complete a master's degree in educational administration at the University of North Texas in Denton. Over the following decades, he was also awarded honorary doctorates from Oral Roberts University, Canada Christian College, and Netanya Academic College in Israel, and he has served on Oral Roberts University's Board of Regents since 1989. Hagee's first pulpit came in October 1966, when he founded Trinity Church in San Antonio. That same year, on August 26, 1960, several years earlier, he had married his first wife, Martha, and the couple had 2 children together, Christopher and Tish. But by 1975, the marriage had ended in divorce, and Hagee resigned from his role as senior pastor of Trinity Church. Rather than stepping away from ministry, he started over. Later that same year, he founded a new congregation in Castle Hills, a San Antonio suburb, simply called The Church. In 1976, he married Diana Castro, a member of that congregation, and the marriage became both a personal and professional partnership. Diana Hagee, who holds her own bachelor's degree in science from Trinity University, became deeply involved in his ministry work. She was later honored with the Lion of Judah Award by the Jewish Federation of Greater Houston for her advocacy on behalf of Israel. Together, John and Diana Hagee have 5 children and 13 grandchildren. In 1987, the congregation John and Diana had built together became Cornerstone Church, the name under which it would grow into a religious institution with a national footprint. Today, Cornerstone Church describes itself as a non-denominational evangelical congregation with more than 22,000 active members, making it one of the largest churches in the country. Some more recent figures put the number even higher, closer to 25,000, reflecting continued growth even as Hagee moved into his 80s. Cornerstone's footprint in San Antonio extended well past a single sanctuary. Hagee founded Cornerstone Christian Schools, a K-4, through 12 college preparatory institution built around a Bible-centered curriculum, giving the ministry a direct role in the education of thousands of children over the decades. He also founded the Sanctuary of Hope, a residential program offering housing and support to young expectant mothers who chose to carry their pregnancies to term, an initiative that reflected his firm anti-abortion convictions translated into direct social service rather than political advocacy alone. Between the church campus, the school, the housing ministry, and the broadcast operation, Cornerstone evolved into something closer to a small institutional ecosystem than a single congregation, with Hagee sitting at the center of nearly all of it for the better part of 4 decades. Cornerstone Church was only one part of Hagee's reach. He is the founder and CEO of Global Evangelism Television and the founder and president of John Hagee Ministries, which broadcasts his teaching across national radio and television. At the peak of its distribution, the ministry's programming aired on roughly 160 television stations, about 50 radio stations, and 8 networks, including the Trinity Broadcasting Network, reaching an estimated 99 million homes domestically, with additional international distribution across Canada, Africa, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and other regions. Hagee is also a prolific author, credited with dozens of books, several of which reached the New York Times bestseller list. His media platform gave him something few American pastors have ever had: a direct line to a mass national audience for both his theology and his political views. Writing has been as central to Hagee's public identity as preaching. Across his career, he has been credited as the author of dozens of books. Figures cited by his own ministry have ranged from around 40 to 45 major titles, with several reaching the New York Times bestseller list, an unusual level of commercial publishing success for an evangelical pastor outside the prosperity gospel megachurch tradition. His writing spans several recurring themes: biblical prophecy and end-times eschatology, the theological case for supporting Israel, and, in his earlier career, more conventional pastoral and family life topics. Jerusalem Countdown, 2006, and Four Blood Moons, 2013, became his two most commercially and culturally significant works, each spawning companion sermon series, video teachings, and, in the case of Four Blood Moons, a feature-length documentary film. His books have functioned less as standalone literary projects than as extensions of his broader ministry platform, material designed to be taught from the pulpit, distributed through Hagee Ministries' broadcast network, and sold at CUFI's national events, reinforcing the same theological and political messaging across every arm of his organization simultaneously. Perhaps Hagee's most politically consequential creation came in 2006, when he founded Christians United for Israel, commonly known as CUFI. Incorporated on February 7, 2006, the organization was explicitly designed to function as a Christian counterpart to the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, mobilizing evangelical political support behind Israel. It has since grown into the largest pro-Israel organization in the country by membership claims. Hagee's advocacy for Israel isn't simply a political position, it flows directly from his theology. He has long taught that Israel's establishment in 1948 fulfilled biblical prophecy and that God maintains an unbroken covenant with the Jewish people, a belief system generally described as Christian Zionism. That framework runs through nearly all of his writing and preaching, and it's also where some of his most serious controversies would eventually take root. What began with roughly 400 pastors and Christian leaders at its founding grew at a remarkable pace. By around 2010, 5 years in, CUFI was already claiming over 400,000 members and running about 40 events a month nationwide, putting it, by some counts, on pace with the American Israel Public Affairs Committee in terms of sheer size. The organization's annual Washington Summit became a fixture of the political calendar, described by observers as a Christian counterpart to AIPAC's own policy conference, drawing thousands of delegates each July to lobby Congress directly on Israel-related legislation. By the mid-2010s, CUFI had surpassed 1 million members, and it crossed 2 million shortly after. Growth continued through the following decade. By 2019, the organization claimed more than 7 million members, and by 2023 that figure had climbed past 10 million, a scale that made CUFI, by membership claims, the largest pro-Israel organization in the country. As of the 2026 Washington Summit, held in early July at the Gaylord National Resort and Convention Center, CUFI continued to describe itself in those terms. More than 10 million members organized into congregational chapters, campus chapters, and lay leadership networks, with a legislative footprint that reportedly includes millions of dollars in congressional lobbying tied to Iron Dome funding, Iran and Syria sanctions, and the Taylor Force Act. CUFI's activities expanded well beyond an annual conference. Over the years, the organization built out a college outreach arm, CUFI on Campus, with recognized chapters on hundreds of university campuses, an educational initiative called CUFI-U, a prayer-focused women's initiative called Daughters for Zion, a televised program called The Watchman, And in 2020, a dedicated advocacy arm called the Kufi Action Fund focused specifically on Middle East foreign policy. Its stated positions include opposition to international pressure on Israel to make territorial concessions, support for sanctions against Iran and Hezbollah, opposition to U.S. aid to the Palestinian Authority absent policy changes, and vocal opposition to the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. At its summits, Hagee has framed the mission in explicitly biblical terms, at one point telling thousands of delegates gathered in Washington that Christian support for Israel was a matter of scriptural obligation, not merely policy preference. Hagee has built much of his public reputation on interpreting current events through the lens of biblical prophecy. His 2006 book, Jerusalem Countdown, argued that a coming confrontation with Iran fit into a larger biblical narrative pointing toward the end times, a message that resonated strongly with his base of supporters and drew sharp criticism from others who accused him of using apocalyptic rhetoric to stoke fear and hostility toward the Muslim world. This pattern, reading world events as confirmation of scriptural prophecy, has remained a defining and polarizing feature of his preaching for decades. Hagee's pro-Israel theology has generated a separate, longer-running dispute that has less to do with politics than with core Christian doctrine. Whether he teaches that Jewish people can be saved without accepting Jesus Christ, a position generally known as dual covenant theology. The controversy dates back at least to the late 1980s, when Hagee told the Houston Chronicle that evangelizing Jewish people specifically was, in his words, a uniquely unproductive endeavor, arguing that Jewish people already possessed a covenant relationship with God that other faith traditions did not have. It resurfaced publicly again in 2006, when the Jerusalem Post reported that Hagee and Southern Baptist pastor Jerry Falwell had both adopted dual covenant beliefs, a claim so consequential within evangelical circles that the newspaper later issued a correction describing it as a misrepresentation of Hagee's actual position. Hagee has repeatedly and explicitly denied holding to dual covenant theology in formal statements. In one such statement, responding to renewed claims from the Lausanne Consultation on Jewish Evangelism, he said plainly that he does not believe in or teach a dual covenant, and noted that his ministry has, for decades, avoided treating events like Kufis, Nights to Honor Israel, as settings for targeted conversion efforts, while still offering a full presentation of Christian faith to anyone who asks about it. Critics, including confessional Reformed theologians, apologetic researchers, and some fellow evangelical leaders, have remained unconvinced, pointing to Hagee's own past statements suggesting that no form of Christian evangelism aimed at Jewish people had ever succeeded and that Jewish people did not need to go through Christ to reach heaven, alongside what critics describe as a broader pattern of avoiding direct evangelism of Jewish audiences in his ministry's public-facing Israel advocacy work. It remains one of the more persistent and theologically serious criticisms leveled against Hagee from within conservative Christianity. Hagee's prophecy-focused teaching produced its own major controversy roughly a decade after Jerusalem Countdown. In 2013, he released 4 Blood Moons, Something is About to Change, built around astronomer and pastor Mark Biltz's observation that a rare sequence of 4 consecutive total lunar eclipses, a tetrad, would fall on the Jewish holidays of Passover and Sukkot in 2014 and 2015. Hagee argued that the heavens function as what he called God's billboard, and that this particular tetrad, following a historical pattern he traced through earlier tetrads he linked to events such as the expulsion of Jews from Spain in 1492 and the Six-Day War in 1967, signaled that something significant was coming for Israel and the world. He was careful in his public statements not to explicitly predict the second coming of Christ, at one point saying the dates involved were not his own, but came from Scripture and NASA's own eclipse calculations. The book became a bestseller and the basis for a documentary film, but it also drew unusually sharp criticism from within Hagee's own evangelical world, criticism distinct from the political backlash of 2008. Fellow pastors and biblical scholars argued that Hagee's tetrad theory rested on a selective reading of history, that the astronomical pattern he cited was less rare and less exclusively tied to Jewish history than the book implied, and that tying scriptural prophecy to celestial signs risked blurring the line between biblical interpretation and what some critics bluntly labeled Christian astrology. Others pointed out that no endorsements from other theologians or biblical scholars appeared on the book itself, and that some readers felt it echoed a familiar pattern of failed end-times date-setting that had embarrassed evangelical prophecy teachers before, including a widely publicized failed prediction of Christ's return in 1988. When the predicted 2014 to 2015 tetrad came and went without any of the dramatic global events Hagee's framing had implied, critics cited it as confirmation that the theory had overreached. Hagee himself did not present the book as an infallible prediction and continued preaching and writing in the years that followed, but the episode became one of the clearest examples of pushback against his prophetic teaching coming from fellow evangelicals rather than from secular or political critics. No episode in Hagee's public life drew more national attention than the spring of 2008, during the presidential campaign. Senator John McCain, the presumptive Republican nominee, had accepted Hagee's endorsement in late February of that year at a news conference in San Antonio. The relationship was, for a time, mutually beneficial. Hagee led a congregation in the tens of thousands with an even larger television audience, and McCain had welcomed his backing. That changed in May 2008, when audio surfaced of a Hagee sermon from the 1990s. In it, Site index equals 19-1, Hagee said of the Holocaust, "How did it happen? Because God allowed it to happen. Why did it happen? Because God said my top priority for the Jewish people is to get them to come back to the land of Israel." /site. The remarks were reported by the Huffington Post and quickly picked up across national media, where critics characterized them as suggesting the Holocaust was part of a divine plan. McCain moved quickly to distance himself. Site index equals 13-1. His campaign released a statement calling the remarks deeply offensive and indefensible, saying McCain repudiated them and had not known of them before accepting Hagee's endorsement. /site. Barely half an hour after McCain's rejection became public, Hagee withdrew his own endorsement and said he would take no further active role in the campaign. Hagee pushed back hard against the characterization of his remarks. Site index equals 15-1. At a news conference, he said his life's work had been mischaracterized and attacked, and that he had worked tirelessly to eliminate anti-Semitism from the Christian world and to ensure Israel's survival. /site. He insisted his comments had been taken out of context and stated plainly that he did not in any way condone the Holocaust, calling Hitler a monster. Site index equals 11-1. He argued there was a difference between searching for biblical answers to why the Holocaust occurred and approving of it. /site. The 2008 episode wasn't the only controversy tied to Hagee's rhetoric that year, and in fact it was the second major religious controversy of the campaign, not the first. Weeks before the Holocaust remarks surfaced, Hagee had already come under fire over years of past comments about the Roman Catholic Church, which he had referred to in earlier sermons using terms like the Great Whore, an apostate church, and a false cult system, and which he had linked, in his book Jerusalem Countdown, to the historical roots of Nazi anti-Semitism. Catholic League President William Donahue publicly attacked McCain in late February 2008 for accepting Hagee's endorsement, and the pressure built for weeks. On May 12, 2008, Hagee sent Donahue a formal letter of apology, writing that he wanted to express my deep regret for any comments that Catholics have found hurtful, and acknowledging that his past emphasis on the darkest chapters of Catholic Jewish history may have contributed to a mistaken impression that events like the Crusades and the Inquisition defined the Catholic Church as a whole. Hagee credited a series of meetings with Catholic leaders and exposure to historical scholarship on the Catholic Church's actions during the Holocaust with changing his understanding. Donahue accepted the apology, calling it an act that takes courage, and the two men met in person days later in New York. At the time, some observers noted the apology conveniently arrived just before the far larger Holocaust remarks controversy broke, and questioned whether political timing played a role. But the reconciliation with the Catholic League was, by all accounts, genuine and lasting, and it effectively closed that particular controversy before McCain ultimately rejected Hagee's endorsement over the separate Holocaust comments roughly a week later. Separately, Hagee had also stated in past sermons that Hurricane Katrina represented divine judgment connected to homosexuality, a claim that generated its own wave of backlash when it resurfaced during the 2008 campaign scrutiny. Commentators at the time noted the parallel between McCain's Hagee problem and the controversy then surrounding Senator Barack Obama's former pastor, Jeremiah Wright. Two campaigns forced to publicly navigate their relationships with outspoken religious figures in the same election cycle, both of which became recurring flashpoints in national coverage of the race. Hagee's ministry has also faced scrutiny over compensation, in a pattern common to large media-driven ministries, but no less pointed for it. Reporting on Get's tax filings for 1 year examined by journalists found that, as president of the nonprofit, Hagee drew $540,000 in direct compensation, plus another $302,005 for his separate role as president of Cornerstone Church, for combined compensation of $842,005, on top of $414,485 in additional benefits, including contributions to a so-called rabbi trust. That structure, named for the fact that the first known beneficiary of such an arrangement was a rabbi, is a tax-deferred compensation vehicle available to highly paid nonprofit executives, and in Hagee's case it reportedly included a roughly $2.1 million, nearly 8,000-acre ranch property outside Brackettville, Texas, complete with multiple lodges, a manager's house, a smokehouse, a skeet range, and several barns. At the time, the combined package was reported to be among the highest, if not the highest, compensation arrangements for a nonprofit director in the San Antonio area. Tax law experts quoted in coverage of the filings suggested the trust structure appeared designed to shift income that would otherwise be immediately taxable into a form deferred for tax purposes, a legal practice, but one that drew criticism given the ministry's public fundraising appeals. Hagee responded to questions about his finances directly and somewhat combatively, raising his voice at a news conference to insist that the ministry was hiding absolutely nothing from nobody. The episode became a recurring reference point for critics of televangelism more broadly, who point to compensation structures like Hagee's as evidence of a tension between the frugal, sacrificial image many ministries project publicly and the substantial personal wealth some of their leaders have accumulated privately. Hagee's political relationships extended well beyond the 2008 campaign. He was for years the primary funding source behind the Israeli group Im Tirtzu before cutting ties with the organization in 2013. He has taken firm anti-abortion positions, including ending financial support for an Israeli hospital after it began offering abortion procedures. In more recent elections, Hagee endorsed Donald Trump in 2016 and has continued to be a visible presence